Hello, this is XP Scaling, and firstly I want to apologize seeing as I managed to hint this video in my previous video, and it's been like maybe like 2 months, almost 3, so I want to apologize on that, just college and stuff. But my second part is this is going to be a 2-part video. This first video I'm mainly just going to cover his strength, speed, and overall his durability and endurance. So overall we'll be covering his strength, speed, durability, and his various skills in his martial arts. So firstly, covering his strength, or in this case his AP. Side note real quick, honestly I'd say his strength usually is involved in 3 ways, it being 1, his natural strength, 2, his techniques, and 3, him using the advance. And I'll get a bit more into this as the video goes on, but that should be the 3 main points that I'm going to give for now. Now, a good example as to how strong Ohma is, even real early on in the series, is him being shown to easily take on bigger opponents like the Diva King, and easily with 1 strike make him stagger and stumble. And for context, the Diva King was apparently able to crack and apparently create a small crater in concrete with nothing but a kick. So in order to do, say, this feat, he could have easily exerted at least 3,000 psi, or at least 3,000 pounds in that numerical sense, or at least 1.5 tons. Yet easily got manhandled by someone like Ohma with just like a few strikes. Ohma would then later on go on fight Lehito, yet would easily floor him in the beginning of their match, and honestly overwhelmed him once he mounted him. Afterwards in their fight, he was apparently able to match Lehito's pinch strength with nothing but his own strength. Now this should be impressive, as Lehito proceeds to state that he could apparently cut through, steel if he apparently wanted to. But it is explained that he does, the reason why he's able to cut is he uses his grip strength in combination with distance in order to have an accelerant whenever he strikes, essentially creating the cutting edge technique that he uses. But in spite of that, still got bodied by Ohma. Ohma would then easily manhandle Medicine Man with nothing but a few strikes, Medicine Man himself being able to flick his teeth into concrete walls with nothing but his fingers. Now, again, I could also say that this feat was technically, a 3,000 psi feat, but if I wanted to make it more impressive, let's say, for example, apparently he's able to throw these bullets, these teeth with like the force of a 9mm parabol round, right? Essentially, we would be comparing the pressure he released through his fingers, the cartridge case round, whenever it's fired. And the pressure exerted would be around at least 34,800 psi. If you convert that into tons, that's like 17 tons, or at least in that city block range of AP. And of course, this might seem like a highball, but going on to Ohma's character and many of his other feats, it really isn't. Later on, he would fight the sumo wrestler. Also, sorry if I butcher anybody's names. It is what it is. Seki, right? And Seki in the series is known as one of the most durable people in the series. Yeah, Ohma with a few strikes could technically make him stagger. Ohma in I believe the preliminary matches was apparently able to fight Jerry. Jerry being an opponent who could effortlessly, easily beat down and manhandle at least several, at bare minimum, peak human or like Olympian level fighters. But he states he could apparently hit with the force of a big rig. Now, if we take this in a literal sense, that would technically mean that Jerry is outputting at least 80,000 pounds of force in his charge, yet he proceeded to get brick-walled by Ohma. So later on, he was apparently able to have a little scuffle with Carla, who was apparently from the Kurei clan, and was able to resist her grappling. Now, this should be considerably impressive, as even if you're not top tier in the clan, if you're just born from them, you're seemingly like a human just evolved for the sake of combat, and Carla herself, who is from the clan, is considered a deviant even among her own clan members. Now, he would later fight the assassin named Inaba, right? Who Ohma actually does respect and even considers him dangerous, implying that he's actually fighting someone who's relative to his own strength, at least. Though, in the initial beginning half of their fight, he proceeded to manhandle Inaba. Though he would lose the advantage once Inaba used his secret weapon, apparently being his hair. Now, his locks of hair themselves could apparently at least hold up to 15 tons of force in terms of like tensile strength. So Ohma gets wrapped up with at least 3 of these, implying that it takes at least 45 tons to apparently immobilize Ohma, at least this early on in the series. It should be noted that Ohma was only able to break out of his opponent's binding due to the fact that he had used the advance to boost his abilities, and the advance itself has the ability to boost the user's attributes, but considering essentially how he only skimmed the surface of the advance, I'd be fair in saying that he only got like a 2 times boost added to his base, meaning that Ohma potentially in his base could exert at least 22.5 tons, and that would still be within the city block ranges of AP, but thanks to that he would actually win this match. And it could actually be argued he didn't even need to use the advance, but due to the fact that he was binded and decided to overpower his opponent, he decided to use it. Now, afterward, Ohma would go and do some mental training. Now, with his mental training, he was able to project the fighter Adam, whom he felt confident in defeating. Adam himself was easily able to defeat a veteran Kengan fighter in 1 punch. Though it should be noted, Ohma did technically have to use the Nico style to win. But more impressively than that would be the fact that Ohma felt confident that he could apparently take on Murobuchi. Now, this should be very impressive given the fact that, I'm probably going to butcher the name, Murobuchi was able to fight Wakatoski, who legit in the Kengan tournament and in the Kengan series so far was legit part of the big 3 in terms of physically strongest combatants. Yet Ohma was easily able to defeat him. Now, after some time, Ohma would, go off in the woods, train a bit, and, let off some steam. So I'm going to say real quick, I guess a disclaimer or something. Essentially, I had to find this calculation, which I will be showing you guys here. And I tried to use it to the best of my ability, so it may not be completely accurate, but here we go. Now, if we were to apply these numbers essentially into the formula, we would have our perimeter, which is 32.2 inches, or at least the size of one of these smaller craters that Ohma had first punched without essentially exerting himself. The thickness would be at least 226 inches, which is at least the boulder's width, at least in terms of inches. The shear strength, which in this case would apparently be the weight of the boulder, which would be 257 tons. And once we multiply that all together, we would get a total of 1,861,965 pounds, or in tons, that would be 930 tons he had to exert in order to punch one of these smaller craters. Or to give that in a AP perspective, that would be nearing these small town ranges. And granted, I am willing to admit that I am potentially 100% wrong, and I am saying this mainly due to the fact that this calculation was intended for punching metal, and in terms of like the measurements, they were intended for millimeters. But seeing as this calculation did kind of help me understand essentially the impressiveness of this feat, I had to throw around some variables, and again, I'm 100% willing to admit that I am wrong, but I'd say so far this should make for a decent mid-ball. But now let's get back onto what his average should be for Ohma. Now, when he started his second match with Ryan, Ohma was apparently able to get multiple heavy blows on him, and was even acknowledged as strong by two very important individuals. One of them being the Muscle House Julius himself, and the other being Wakatoski, the only other rival to Julius. Though it should be noted that in terms of strength, Ohma really didn't even scale to Ryan, but he was still acknowledged as strong. And it wouldn't be after their essentially limit-breaking advance fight that Ohma was actually relative to a fatigued Ryan, and was actually able to get the win from him. Now, real quick, I'm going to briefly talk about the advance and how it seems to work, and I do plan on going into further detail in the techniques video, which should be in the part 2, but for now, I'm going to give like a basic understanding as to how it works. And originally, it seemed to at least be a boost that could initially boost your speed, or in this case, the velocity of your strikes. At least that's what it was initially theorized. But looking as to how the advance seems to work, it seems to boost the user's abilities. And a good clear example of this is when Ohma is in his first match. He was essentially wrapped up in multiple locks of hair that could require at least 15 tons of force, yet he was able to break free upon using the advance. And I'd say at least him using the advance in his first match seemingly worked as a 2x boost, which again allowed him to free himself. But upon entering his second match and fighting Ryan, Ryan flat out stated like multiple times that he was getting faster, and he was essentially intentionally getting advanced due to the advance. And my reasoning for this would be some of the previous showings implying that the advance can apparently increase its multiplier upon the user, and potentially making a stronger multiplier depending on the user's output. Now, this would lead to Ohma sadly maxing out the advance, though I'd say the maximum multiplier for the advance would potentially be a 5x multiplier. Now again, my reasoning for this would be if we go off the first round and say, he only used a small bit of the advance, it gives him a 2x multiplier. Yet once he fights Ryan just flat out states, he's even faster than what he was previously, implying that it could have at least been a 3x multiplier by the time he had fought Ryan. And even when Ryan uses his own Kure clan removal, Ohma still is able to keep up with him, pushing himself even further. And at one point, it's even, I believe, stated that he could have even gotten stronger had he just been essentially willing to give up his life. So, based off of that evidence, it's more than likely it could be anywhere between a 2 to a 5x multiplier. Again, it really does depend on the user and how much they're essentially willing to gamble their life. So, the reason why I wanted to bring this up would be for the Ohma's next feat, where he was essentially able to defeat a henchman of the worm. But the reason why I wanted to bring this up was apparently this henchman had the advance, yet was easily decimated by Ohma. But to give a decent understanding as to how strong Ohma has to have gotten after his fight with Ryan, based off the user using the advance, and I'll be fair, he's more so in control, it could be seen as anywhere between a 2 or 3x boost. So going off of that, that could imply that Ohma, after his fight and after recovering, potentially could have gotten at least a 3x boost after fighting Ryan. Meaning that if we say that his base strength was say around 200 22.5 tons, at least in terms of physical output. We say he gets at least 3 times stronger. That would mean that Ohma would now be in his base, or at least, for his low ball, be capable of outputting at least 67.5 tons of force. Still within that city block ranges of AP, but still very impressive nonetheless. But now if we look onto what the advance can do to aid Ohma, assuming that the advance could be anywhere between a 2 or 5 times multiplier, that would mean that Ohma's new strength, if we even just say it's only a 2 times multiplier, would now be at 135 tons, or at the maximum would be at 337.5 tons, confirming that Ohma would now be in like that multi-city block ranges. Though I am going to say this would still be within his low ball. But now let's look onto what a mid ball for Ohma could potentially be. Now, one of his very early feats Ohma was able to do was apparently match the cutting strength of Lehito's cutting edge technique. Now, if we take this in a literal sense, Lehito legit states that he could cut through steel. Now, I'm not going to try to explain the complications of essentially this calculation I did, but essentially, the gist of it is, let's say if we have a sheet of metal and it's at least 10 millimeters thick. Now, it would be you would take the thickness, multiply it by its length, and I don't know, let's say it's only like within like 3 feet. The sheer strength of the sheet of steel would require at least bare minimum 100 tons of force in order to overcome its tensile strength essentially. So even if I wanted to lowball his mid ball, which this is, Ohma bare minimum could still be capable of outputting over 100 tons, or in that city block ranges at least. But now let's look as to what that boulder feat that I stated earlier would be. And again, this is how big the boulder he punched should be. Now, even going off of one of his smaller craters, the guy legit could potentially hit with at least 930 tons of force, or definitely in that multi-city block ranges, or nearing even that small town ranges of AP. So obviously speaking, Ohma's low ball in terms of strength would be anywhere between potentially 67 tons to potentially over 337 tons. And Ohma's mid ball would be anywhere between 100 to 900 tons. But now for his low ball, let's potentially say he uses the advance for his mid ball now. Now, implying that the advance could be anywhere between a 2 or even a 5 times multiplier, Ohma's new mid ball strength with the advance would be anywhere between 1,860 tons, which is now within that small town ranges, or at the maximum 4,650 tons, still within that small town ranges, but very much more impressive now. Now let's get onto Ohma's durability and endurance. Now again, much like how I stated for his strength, Ohma's durability and endurance can essentially be summed up in 3 ways. One, just his natural durability and the fact that throughout this arc he actually does, to an extent, adapt. 2, his techniques essentially just improving and allowing his body to be either 1, a lot more durable, or 2, helping improve the longevity of his endurance. And 3, essentially the advance essentially boosting his natural durability to a much higher degree. So now real quick, even early on when he had learned the Nico style, one of the most harshest parts of his training would be the fact that he was brutally beaten for at least 10 days without food or water. He had to suffer multiple bone fractures and his muscles were completely torn asunder. Yet in spite of all that, he still had to fight, and at one point, he even had to fight with weights on. Now, many years later, he would get much more durable and get much higher levels of endurance and even much higher levels of pain tolerance. I would say a clear example of this would be the fact that when Lehito legit peels off a small piece of his flesh, he proceeds to treat it like if it was nothing. He's just like, oh wow, I'm bleeding. Now, sometime later in one of I think the preliminary matches, Ohma has to fight an opponent, Medicine Man, while being hit with essentially a high frequency wave that essentially disables his hearing, as well as being poisoned that also disables his eyesight. And at one point he was also able to parry the teeth of Medicine Man, someone who could, even if I lowball that feat, he was able to pierce concrete with it. Later on, he would fight the super wrestler, I'm not gonna say this name right, Sakai, whatever, the really durable, strong dude, right? Who could easily be as strong as a bare minimum advanced Ohma, yet proceeded to take multiple blows easily. And even if I were to give a calculation for this, he would have to endure at least 45 tons of force at this point. Has shown even in order to get the W, Ohma's more than willing to sacrifice either breaking an entire limb or just in this case, he destroyed multiple of his fingers in order to get the W. He's also shown, despite the amount of damage that his body can and will be under, he's more than willing to just throw down and have a fight with anybody. A good example with this would be the fact that he decided to throw down with Hatsumi despite how many injuries he had received up until that point. He was also able to effortlessly brick wall Jerry, someone who again states he could hit with the force of a Big Mac, implying that he could hit with at least 80,000 pounds of force, or in tons that would be 40 tons, yet was still brick walled by Ohma. In the Kengan matches, in his first match, he would receive multiple whip-like slashes from his opponent Inaba, something like that, right? And ultimately it took at least 45 tons of force in order to essentially immobilize Ohma, at least up until that point, due to Inaba's hair being very special and each lock potentially requiring at least 15 tons of force to break out of. In his mental training, he felt very confident that he could take on Morobuchi with his indestructible technique, allowing him to essentially endure his attack. Also shown throughout the entirety of at least the Kengan series, he's legit suffering from heart failure and having borderline heart attacks and almost having comas, potentially every around the corner moment, yet he proceeds to walk them off, and he's essentially forcing himself to endure until he could get his dream match with, I believe, Kiryu. Was able to receive a kick from the Fang, and legit he kicked him so hard he legit bounced off the wall like a soccer ball, right? Another impressive endurance feat would be the fact that Ohma was able to have 20 reps of 7-minute shadow boxing sessions underwater. So if we take that in a mathematical sense, that would be at least an hour and 40 minutes that Ohma had spent underwater, essentially doing stamina training. Was able to receive the brutal beating that he would take from Ryan. And even if we lowball Ryan's strength to the absolute minimum and say that, he's easily as strong as Ohma when he would use the Iron Breaker, this would mean that Ohma would have to receive strikes from Ryan that could potentially output at least 67.5 tons of force, or still within that city block ranges. Afterwards was essentially able to not outlast but last long enough to exhaust Ryan in their fight after them essentially having their limit breaking advanced fight, and ultimately proved that he could defeat Ryan. Now potentially it could be argued, after he received his coma, almost death-like state, Ohma should have gotten at least 3 times stronger, implying that his new base durability could potentially be where his strength is at, meaning that Ohma could now potentially endure 67.5 tons of force, meaning that he's now within that city block ranges of durability. Now, he was able to essentially resist the internal damage that he had received from that heart failure, and even said, yeah, no, I probably got like 3 days left, but I'm pretty sure I can make it. Would then, I believe in his it's his third match, would have an all-out stamina-based fight with Cosmo, and even though he had all of his stamina used up, he essentially trained his body to the point where if that does happen, his body will use up, I believe, the last of his protein cells in order to give himself, like, I believe, like a second wind. And even if it means dying, his body will convert this energy. Afterwards, after, recovering a little bit, he was able to receive a Rishiki's palm from Kryu, and this technique could essentially do this to an opponent right here, if you guys take these two dudes as an example. Though it should be noted that he was able to endure this technique thanks to the Indestructible. Now, in his fourth match with Wakatasuki, was legit with the Indestructible able to endure multiple strikes from this dude, whom he states hits harder than Ryan. And Ohma even states that if the Indestructible is a 10, Wakatasuki's strikes is at least a 50, implying that he's hitting 50 times harder than what his durability should handle. Yet Ohma is now essentially enduring these strikes. Though it should be noted that, again, he was no longer able to use the Indestructible, yet in spite of that, Ohma decided to fight defensively throughout the entirety of this match. So, if we take into consideration the fact that Wakatasuki could bare minimum hit harder than Ryan, who I managed to bare minimum calculate could hit with like 67.5 tons of force, yet Ohma was, with the Indestructible still able to endure these attacks. Ohma could technically be getting hit with, again, considering that the techniques of the Nico Saw actually do vastly improve the abilities of the user, potentially over like 300 tons of force. And I'll get onto that later on when I get into like the techniques and all, but that'll be for the second video. Meaning that Ohma's durability could be anywhere between 67 to potentially over 300 tons of force, depending on his techniques with his durability. But now, most impressively, I think would be the fact that Ohma, throughout the entirety of essentially the series, was essentially fighting heart failure, was essentially having multiple heart attacks, was dying, yet in spite of it all, would fight through everything. Even after his fight with Wakatasuki, he had like severe internal damage, it's implied, yet decided, yeah, nah, it's better to die fighting than like, just die laying down, right? And again, he was able to even use the advance in this death-like state, though again, it should be like a more controlled and not like, going all out, but still. And even after he had used the advance, he was still shown to still be able to fight and hold his own, at least for a bit. Now we get onto his combat and reaction speed. And again, as previously stated, like the Nico style can enhance these abilities, but overall, I'd say Ohma actually naturally does get faster without these techniques. So now, first off, even if I guess like, if you wanted to downplay his speed, I could easily say Ohma could easily be comparable to like professional kickboxers. Just the fact that he can easily blitz and manhandle them. But I would say a very important and very impressive early on speed feat would be the fact that he was able to dodge teeth thrown at him by Medicine Man that had enough force to easily pierce concrete, meaning that the speed of these teeth being thrown could apparently succeed at least 3,000 psi. Another very early on speed feat would be the fact that with the advance on, Ohma was apparently able to have a brief scuffle with Hatsumi, and at one point was even able to catch him off guard. Now, this should be important, even though this is like a laid back and not, in the best condition Hatsumi, but this should still be very impressive nonetheless. And due to that, considering one, just how fast Hatsumi is, and two, the kind of fighter he is, he's a very defensive fighter. Now, another very impressive early on feat would be the fact that he was able to blitz Jerry, whose martial arts style is based off of real life weapons. And one of his signature movements, or in this case, one of his signature techniques, I meant to say, is the Scud missile. Yet Ohma was easily able to dodge and at one point even blitz him. Now, if we take, Jerry's martial art to a literal sense, we could say that potentially Jerry based off, Jerry himself, the character, he's at least, I believe 37 years old. And we say it took him at least 7 years in order to develop this martial art, which he did. And now we look into, say, the specific time period potentially that could have been happening within the Kengan series, as the Kengan series technically was published around 2012. Now, the reason why I'm saying all this is technically he would have to compare, or using real life weapons, he would have more than likely used the Brosmos missile, which was developed in 2005 and had at least a speed of Mach 3. And the reason why I essentially brought all this up was, Jerry based his martial art off of real life weapons, and it took him 7 years. Going off of that time period, he would have been comparable in terms of speed to the Brosmos, which could move at again Mach 3. But now, taking that into an account, Mach 3 in terms of speed would be moving at 2,225.3 miles per hour, yet almost still blitzed him. And he even managed to blitz him when he was apparently at full speed, and he even said, "Oh yeah, nah, I'm like a Full Metal Jacket." Now, even if you do say, he's still not at the speed of a missile, even if we take that statement, oh, he's moving at a Full Metal Jacket, which could apparently be referred to the 7.26 millimeter bullet, Jerry still would have been moving at around Mach 2.5, or around 1,854.42 miles per hour. So that's still bullet level, and that's still very impressive early on in the series. Now, later on, in terms of speed, Ohma would legit fight a joking around Carla, who, again, she's from the Kure clan. Kure clan humans, right? I'm not gonna even say they're people. They're just a different breed of humans at this point, are specialized for fighting, and she's even considered a deviant amongst her own clan members, yet Ohma was still relative to her in terms of speed. Though, again, she was, more than likely just, toying around. Later on would fight Innova, and initially had the speed advantage against him, and was even able to defend against him when he used the technique that seemingly made him use and would leave behind after images. Though Ohma himself was easily able to surpass this speed with his own technique, easily making up to 3 initial after images, which he would then proceed to amp up the speed and make at least 5 after images. And in his fight with Ryan, Ohma initially had the speed advantage when fighting Ryan, though this was a messing around Ryan. Now, there's 2 ways you could take this feat with Ryan, and I am going to come back to this, but essentially, it should be very impressive considering the fact that a not serious Ryan was easily able to catch Rai's attack, if I even said his name right. But Rai is stupidly fast, and apparently has been completely stated to be around lightning timing, at least a few times. So if you want to take this in a literal sense, you could say, oh, for a mid-ball, I am going to say, Ohma might be around lightning speed. And I'll leave it at that for a bit. So essentially, the speed of lightning has 2 kinds of speeds. There's the lightning strike, and then there's the return strike. Essentially, most lightning strikes should be around like 270,000 miles per hour. But if we say, it's a return stroke, that would mean that, Ohma through this Ryan feat would have been comparable to at least 222 million miles per hour, or at least like, a third of the speed of light. Though, again, this may be a bit stretching it. I'd say, for a mid-ball, it's more than likely, a lightning strike. And if you really want to take some statements, you could really like take this feat legit out of proportion. So I'll leave this up for like some of the high balls for later, but now back onto some of his other feats. Now, again, as I stated before, Ohma did have the initial speed advantage against this Ryan, though Ryan was still messing around. Now, once Ohma used the advance, he was actually equal with a serious Ryan. Though, he didn't necessarily... he essentially had to force Ryan to like unleash his potential. So with this feat, you could say he was only using like a 3 times boost from the advance, meaning that Ohma, at least at this stage in their fight, was moving around Mach 9 with this base Ryan. Though once, Ryan used his removal and actually fought him equally, Ohma had to essentially fully unleash the advance. Now, his new speed with this boost could have potentially been like around Mach 15 speeds. Though it wasn't until he had to fight a fatigued Ryan that he was actually able to defeat and blitz him a few times. Now, after that like near-death experience, Ohma, again waking up, could have again gotten at least 3 times faster. And with this new speed, he was easily able to defeat one of the henchmen of like the evil Nico. And one of these henchmen, again, apparently had the advance. So if we say he's only using like, the bare minimum, like a 3 times boost, that would mean that this henchman was moving around like Mach 9 speeds, yet was easily manhandled and toyed with by Ohma. In his match with Cosmo, he was actually slightly relative to him, despite the fact that Cosmo had essentially developed a technique which allows him to have a sort of kind of like low tier precog. So essentially he's fighting an opponent who could read his movements at least 1 or 2 steps ahead of him. Yet, in spite of that, Ohma was still able to get him into a headlock, and at one point, he was able to use Cosmos' zone technique even against him. The zone technique essentially being it's like a brain lag that Cosmo had learned to time, essentially. So essentially, if I'm getting this right, if you were to say go in for a punch and punch Cosmo in the face, he would have memorized, or in this case, he would have perfected the timing of when your brain is essentially unconscious when it throws that initial action, and he again essentially goes after that opening. Ohma was essentially able to match Cosmo's timing and throw him off and get him that way. And later on, I guess towards the end of the Kengan matches, he was actually considered the sparring partner for a hyped up Hatsumi. This should be very impressive, as this isn't like a casual Hatsumi. This is essentially a primed condition Hatsumi, and it took Ohma essentially going, I'd say like 85 to potentially 90% of his full speed, at least in base. Would later on have a serious fight with Kryu, who is another fighter known for his speed. Even though the fact that Kryu, if I'm even saying his name right, was able to get multiple, blitzes on Ohma. Ohma was always able to react, dodge, and even block and parry these attacks. At one point, he was even able to he was essentially the first opponent to like land any meaningful strikes. But I would say most impressively about this fight would be the fact that Ohma was still able to keep up with Kryu when he was using the Fallen Demon. And the Fallen Demon essentially is a technique that is similar to the Advance in the fact that it's able to increase the perception of the user and their speed as well. So Kiryu essentially has taken like a ton of damage, so we can't say he's using like, you know, a high tier boost. But if we say that Kiryu in his base is relative to the stronger Ohma, who could potentially be moving at like Mach 9 speeds, and the Fallen Demon only gives him like a 2x boost, that would mean that Ohma in his base was comparable to someone who should be moving around Mach 18. Yet Ohma still managed to get the W in the end. Afterwards, in his fight with Wakatosuki, Ohma was easily able to dodge and had to parry most of his strikes. And this is another fighter who, even though he's not really known for his speed, he was still very relative to Ohma, despite how fast he should be based off the calculation I just gave you guys. So essentially, just to sum up Ohma's speed, if I say that his initial base speed was comparable to Mach 3, Ohma, after his fight with Ryan, managed to at least get 3 times stronger due to that fight, and again, you know, regaining his memories, meaning that his new base speed would be around Mach 9. But technically, we could push it up a bit further if we say he was able to keep up with this much faster Kiryu with the Fallen Demon, meaning that Ohma's new potential base speed could be around Mach 18. But as far as like a mid ball, you could potentially say, like theoretically, if you want to like, you know, get up there, Ohma should potentially be comparable to a lightning strike, or around 270,000 miles per hour. And in terms of like a high ball, I am going to save that for a very important match, so this should cover his speed. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be making a part 2. I don't want to make this video way too long as it is. And until we meet again, peace.